Eli Drinkwitz adds a four-star player to what is likely to be his lowest ranked class ever. I'm going to tell you why I don't think that's that big of a deal. Plus, Dennis Gates wants to expand the tournament, and I decidedly do not. So I want to have it out with one of my favorite people on the planet, Dennis Gates, coming up right now on Locked On Mizzou.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball. Thanks for making this show your first listen every day. We are free and available on YouTube and wherever you get audio podcasts, including now on the SiriusXM app as well. Baseball's back. Check out, of course, the Royals and the Cardinals tonight, just a little after 7 o'clock on the app or on channels 185 and 186, respectively. But, of course, we got to talk Mizzou football here at the top. Missouri buoying its recruiting class here a couple days ago. Eli Drinkwitz securing the services, well, at least unofficially at this point, right? But pretty sure that Brian Huff is going to be a Missouri Tiger, the four-star linebacker, already throwing some shots at his home state of Arkansas at Twitter, apparently saying, "Why y'all so upset?" just yesterday, in a pretty obvious reference to some Razorback fans who have been coming at him on social media. So you might be wondering, how did Missouri manage to get this kid out of Arkansas to the state of Missouri? Well, it's quite possible that there's an opportunity for Brian Huff. And by the way, the other four-star off-ball linebacker, Nicholas Rodriguez, who is signed out of Florida. Well, again, not signed. I keep using that word incorrectly. A verbal commitment from Nicholas Rodriguez out of the state of Florida, along with two of his high school teammates, by the way. But a couple really good out-of-state linebackers, four-star players. That's not necessarily frequently the case for Missouri. And I think what that tells you is that, well, once you get past Tyron Hopper and Chad Bailey, I'm not sure there are a lot of incredibly obvious answers at linebacker right now. So playing time could be very much available as soon as next year at that position. But overall, for this recruiting class, obviously this is going to help the rankings quite a bit for Missouri. Overall, just the numbers are starting to accumulate. So not only the quality, but maybe just as importantly in terms of the rankings, the quantity of players going up for Missouri, showing that people have said ultimately this class is going to end up probably in the 30s in terms of national rankings. That's probably going to be accurate. And ultimately, that's okay. Obviously, the expectations have been raised by Eli Drinkwitz in terms of recruiting rankings these past few seasons. Well, obviously, Missouri still would rather live in the top 15 or the top 25 than the top 35 or 40. No kidding, right? But one class that is maybe the outlier here, hopefully this is the outlier, well, not a big deal. Because again, one class in the 35s, the 40s, who really cares? Because from class to class, the difference between 15 and 35 isn't much. Again, over 10 years, yes, that's going to accumulate and it's going to make a difference. But year to year, again, if Missouri wins 8, 9 games this season, something like that, has a really nice season, plays in a good bowl game, I just don't think any of this stuff is going to matter, especially when, again, we're so early in the process here. Even at this point, these kids have not even played their senior year of high school football yet. And to that point, you look at Jackson Hancock, a guy that I said would be really hard to evaluate just based on his level of competition in high school. Well, he didn't have a lot of Power 5 offers other than Missouri, but suddenly, well, he's been invited to the Army All-American Bowl. So again, a kid from Canton, Georgia, who may be flying under the radar a little bit. Maybe this is a great pickup by Missouri and Drinkwitz. Again, that 2021 class that was ranked as high as 15 or 13 even by some outlets, well, didn't really bear as much fruit as we might have hoped. So again, year to year, it's hard to overanalyze this stuff. Or what I should say is you should not overanalyze this stuff, in my humble opinion. Now, when it comes to this season's Missouri football team, the rumor mill on the quarterback position has really been all over the place this offseason. I've maintained all offseason that if you had to make me bet even money on anybody to start, well, it's going to be Brady Cook. That's who I'm going to bet on. On the other hand, if Sam Horn or Jake Garcia were to get the start in week one or take the job for the whole season, I wouldn't exactly be shocked. I think it's very much up in the air. And I've heard, again, the rumor mill. At one point it was, hey, Sam Horn's made some big strides and the coaching staff expects him to play this season with a year of practice and watching under his belt. But now suddenly it seems like the rumor mill's kind of going back toward Brady Cook's way, and that, he's made a lot of strides, attended the Manning passing camp, is 100% healthy, all this good stuff. Well, again, to me, it doesn't matter who starts, but I will say the best case scenario to me, the earlier somebody takes this job and grabs the bull by the horns, no pun intended there with Sam Horn, by the way, but the earlier it happens, I think the better, because the longer this drags out, it gets worrisome to me. I don't want to see, as some have suggested, that, hey, maybe this quarterback competition could actually bleed in to the first week or two of the season. Let's see what happens when live bullets are flying out there, live reps and snaps during the games for these guys. I just don't want to see that. I really don't. And I think really, if that's what happens, to me, that's a bit of a cop-out. If you're Eli Drinkwitz, the head coach, you got to pick one and you got to ride with him. I just don't think you can go into the Kansas State game in week 3 and not have settled on a guy and given him the amount of reps. Again, whichever player it is, whoever it is, does not really matter to me. To me, you've just got to evaluate the right guy and go with him, because the old cliche of, hey, if you got 2 quarterbacks, you don't have one. I gotta say that's probably true in this case. And while, of course, the quarterback position has been the biggest talk of the offseason for Mizzou football, well, I've seen a lot of talk lately about whether or not the defense could take a step back this season. Well, I want to talk about that, but regardless, if Missouri is going to be a championship team this season, well, I'll tell you what, it's all about making sure every player is a perfect fit. And it's the same when it comes to your vehicle, by the way. Every part needs to fit just right. So next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors, because with eBay Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure every part fits you just right the first time around. Just add your vehicle to My Garage and look for the green check to know the part will fit or your money back, because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game. And when you shop on eBay Motors, you'll get just that. With over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. So get the right parts, get the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers, eligible items only, exclusions apply. Thanks for making Locked On Mizzou your first listen every day. And everydayers, join me next week. I'm going to talk about Missouri's swan song in the SEC East. Let's talk a little history next week, the rivalries that are going to be a little bit fractured in this new thing, but even more importantly, what are Missouri's chances to take the East for the third and final time in 2023? But of course, if that's going to happen, well, Missouri's defense is going to have to be at least as good as it was last season, and I'd probably say even better. But there is some talk of, hey, let's not just assume that Missouri's defense is going to be as good as last year. Could the defense actually take a step back in 2023? Well, to answer that question shortly, yes, it could happen. And one reason for that is that defense, quite simply, year to year is more unpredictable than offense. That's just a statistical, if not a fact, certainly an obvious statistical pattern that has been noticed throughout football over the last few decades. College, pro, doesn't matter. The bottom line is defense, more unpredictable, offense, more stable. Listen, if you got Patrick Mahomes every year, you got Chase Daniel for 4 years, you can pretty well assume that your offense is going to be stable. But I tell you, I think Missouri's defense, of course, specifically, if we're going to talk statistics, well, obviously returning production portends to having a good defense the following year. Well, especially in the back seven, Missouri's secondary, their linebackers, tremendous returning production and good returning production at that. So the worry would be the defensive ends, right? For the most part, pass rushers. Well, after last season, actually, I have a fair amount of confidence in the strategy that Missouri has employed with the defensive ends this offseason. If you think about what Missouri did at the defensive tackle position last year on the interior of the defensive line, well, they got a lot of numbers. They threw a lot of stuff at the wall, a lot of transfers at the wall, and saw what stick. And, well, Josh Landry, Christian Williams, Jaden Jernigan, among others, for the most part, it worked out pretty darn well. And I'm thinking, by the way, after last year, Missouri very deftly and wisely plucked DJ Coleman out of the transfer portal from a lower level of college football. I have a fair amount of confidence that we can do a similar thing this season with Joe Moore's son, by the way, who transferred from Arizona State, among many other names that have come in through the transfer portal. Perhaps former Boonville product, DJ Wesolak, a former four-star player out of high school. Well, it seemed like he moved to linebacker last season. Didn't really play a ton, played a little bit, didn't make any tackles or anything. Perhaps he shifts back to defensive end. Maybe that's a more natural spot for him. I don't know. The point is, I have a decent amount of confidence after seeing what Missouri did under Blake Baker and defensive line coach Al Davis last season, that they'll be able to do something similar on the outside, what they did with the interior. Plus, again, as I've said many times before, when you're as good in the secondary as I believe that Missouri was last season, I think they can be even better this season in the secondary. Well, suddenly you're able to do a lot more things in terms of bringing extra bodies in the blitz. You can bring 5 guys, 6 guys, even 7 guys occasionally in a pressure package and still hold up in man coverage on the back end. Most teams can't do that, but that's something that I thought made Missouri really special defensively last season, and there's no reason for me to believe at this moment, barring injury, that that's going to be even worse. And actually, I think with Dalen Carnell in at the coverage at the star position in the slot instead of Martez Manuel, I think actually Missouri gets a little bit better in coverage. Carnell, a former 4-star corner, playing what amounts to a box safety hybrid linebacker position. That's a pretty good luxury that not a lot of defenses have, and one that even if Missouri does take a slight step back in terms of their edge rushers, I think there's enough there just continuity-wise and what I believe is going to be an upgrade with Carnell. Just in terms of coverage, I think the Missouri defense can be even better, and I would bet on that more than a step back. And this week in sports is sort of notoriously slow, right? We're right before media days in college football in the SEC anyway. Baseball goes away for a couple days after the All-Star break. So Dennis Gates took that opportunity to once again stump for an expansion of the NCAA tournament. And while the last time Dennis Gates made this argument, I simply just disagreed. I was going, I think that 68 is fine. Really, 64 was even better, to be honest with you. The first 4 doesn't do a lot for me, but you know what? I can live with the first 4. I really can. Not exactly ruining the tournament for me either way, but I will say, while I watch every moment of Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, that first weekend of the tournament, I possibly can. The first 4 just isn't that same type of appointment viewing for me. Now, I'll watch it. Don't get me wrong. Especially, hey, if it's second half and it seems like there's a close game going, sure, I'll turn it on without a doubt. But I do think there's a real serious law of diminishing returns, a law that is undefeated, by the way. I haven't seen an example of that not being the case. But in this case, I think once you get past 68, I think it starts to really diminish pretty seriously, going to 90 teams or 128 or whatever the proposal is. To be fair to Dennis Gates, he's saying go to 88 or 90. What exactly that bracket would look like, I'm not sure. But to me, just adding more basketball is not necessarily good. I know some people will say, well, how can you argue against more basketball? Well, again, to me, it's the law of diminishing returns. That's as simple as I can put it, because eventually you do have too much basketball, because you already have the case where I think a lot of fans like me watch so much basketball that first weekend that by the time they get to the Final Four, they're almost a little burnt out by college basketball, and sort of the excitement is worn off a bit. Your NCAA bracket has already been burned. Your survivor pool is done. Missouri is lost in the second round. Don't get me wrong, it was fabulous when Missouri's there. Once they get knocked out, well, for every single team that gets knocked out, let's be honest, the tournament is 1,000 times more exciting the farther you advance in it. That's just part of the natural flow of the tournament. I just don't understand how expanding to 90 teams helps that. In fact, I actually think it makes that problem a little bit worse potentially. One of the things I really didn't like about Dennis Gates' argument this time, though, uniquely, is that he used the word access. He says, he's basically saying, hey, we need to provide more teams with championship access. He uses that phrase. And to me, that's sort of like saying, well, you know what? The Detroit Lions have not had access to the Super Bowl. Well, it's true that they haven't been to the Super Bowl, but does that mean they haven't had access to the Super Bowl? Just in general, I'm not a big fan of that word in terms of, I don't know, it's a very politically loaded word. Let's put it that way. Like if you say, I don't know, this or that portion of society doesn't have access to a checking account, for instance. Well, are you saying that that sort of implies that somebody isn't allowing a person to have a checking account? Well, I can open up a checking account if I have money to put into a checking account. That doesn't mean if I don't have money, that doesn't mean they're not giving me access. Do you understand what I'm saying here? I just don't love the use of that particular language. Now, if you want to make an argument that, hey, I actually think it's good for basketball, it's good for the fans, by the way. Can we talk about the fans ever? It may be good for coaches. Heck, maybe it's good for the players to get more guys get the experience of playing in March Madness. Okay, there's an argument. Just to me, the access thing just really rang incredibly hollow for me. But again, if you want to make an argument to me that's better for the fans, better for the players, most importantly, then great. Make me that argument for expansion. Just don't hide behind the access argument. Just wasn't a huge fan of that. But listen, you know who I am a huge fan of? Dennis Gates. Don't get me wrong here. If he were here right now, I'd probably kiss him on the mouth. That's how much I love Dennis Gates and Missouri basketball right now. This is no real criticism, personal criticism of him, but I just, bad arguments, faulty logic, and especially evasive language, things like access, just not a huge fan of that. And coming up with all the news coming out of Evanston, Illinois and Northwestern, I want to talk about hazing and rites of passage right after this. By the way, quickly before I get to my hazing and rites of passage talk here, Missouri playing Memphis at the Dome in St. Louis this September. Well, I've seen a bit of talk about the state of downtown St. Louis regarding this football game and leading up to it. And I'll just say, yeah, the state of downtown St. Louis, from my experience right now, not great. It's definitely not great. It could be a lot better than it used to be. In fact, stayed the night. A friend of mine parked his truck in downtown St. Louis overnight. Well, that was a big mistake. Back window bashed into, property stolen. the whole deal. The police acted like, well, it's a pretty nightly occurrence. So not exactly a huge shock there. But again, I did attend the WWE Royal Rumble about a year and a half ago at the Dome, by the way. So a late Sunday night, 10 o'clock at night or so. So this is actually relevant here, because while I wouldn't want to be caught walking downtown late at night in St. Louis by myself a whole lot, the bottom line is, don't let the fear of crime, anything like that, keep you away from the Missouri-Memphis game. Number one, that game's likely to kick off early in the day, not going to be a night game. But regardless, I'm telling you, you're going to be fine. You're going to be leaving the Dome with a whole bunch of other Missouri fans and some Memphis fans as well. You'll all be walking in a big group together, either to a parking lot or to the train or whatever it might be. Don't worry about it. Go to the Memphis game. It'll be fine. Tickets are $20. I want to see Missouri fans fill up the Dome in St. Louis. I'm not saying you got to hang out until 3 a.m. or go across the river to the strip clubs or anything like that. By all means, clear out after the game and head to St. Charles or something if you want to. Head to the boat. Head to Main Street. I don't know. Do what you got to do. But don't be a negative Nancy and a weenie and be afraid of the big city. You should be in some instances. I'm just telling you, from my experience, my very recent experience, you'll be fine at the Dome. Really. Don't hang around until 3 a.m. Leave when the game's over and maybe go hang out somewhere else. You want to do that, fine, but don't let it scare you away from the game whatsoever. And finally, on this hazing stuff, I haven't really specifically looked into the Northwestern allegations and all that good stuff, I have to be honest. But I will just say, I think there is a fine but obvious line, in my opinion, between hazing and rites of passage. Because, yes, when it comes to hazing, in terms of humiliating people, yeah, that's really bad. And that's something that it's immature beyond belief, in my opinion. Like, whether it's, I don't know, violent humiliation or sexual humiliation, God forbid any of that kind of stuff, knock it off. Like, there's no place for any of that in polite society. But I am cool, I will say, with rites of passage. And I think at a certain point, let's hope our society doesn't get so soft that that becomes bullying or hazing or something like that. For instance, back in the day, NBA rookies had to carry the bags of the veterans like through the airport and all that good stuff. Well, these days NBA teams have staffs that do that kind of stuff for them. So a lot of that stuff has kind of changed a little bit. Now it's stuff like, okay, if you watch HBO's Hard Knocks, you notice the NFL teams, they'll make the rookies stand up and sing their fight song or perform some kind of skit, something that they all had to do before and they all get a laugh out of. Everybody's kind of in on the joke, big whoop, another rite of passage. But, even if the frat house type deal, I wasn't in a frat at Missouri. My dad was, my mom was in a sorority, but from what I've heard, listen, obviously there's frat stuff that goes way over the line. My buddy Scott, who was an SAE at the University of Indiana, well, at the end of his like hell week or whatever, the guy he was the pledge under, he like wanted to break this guy's arm, like literally. And Scott is one of the nicest guys in the entire world. So again, if he had gotten Scott to that point where he wanted to inflict actual physical violence on that person, maybe this isn't really in the spirit of brotherhood and camaraderie and friendship that we were trying to build here. Again, but if the pledges have to clean the house, hey, I'm fine with that. Get out a mop, get out a broom, and then, well, when you're a sophomore or whatever, then the freshman will have to do it. That's a rite of passage. That's all part of the initiation. That's all fine. But then it's pretty obvious when it crosses over into, I don't know, mean-spiritedness and borderline torture at times. Yeah, that's the kind of stuff that I think we need to clean out of society. I don't know about you, but hey, thanks for not cleaning this podcast out of your feed. Of course, we are free and available wherever you get podcasts. Thanks for making this show your first listen every day. And for you everydayers, next week, Don't forget, I'm going to talk about that SEC East swan song. Yes, the last season of the SEC East for Missouri and the conference as well, all the ramifications and the history of this past decade. I'll have it for you right here on Locked On Mizzou.